The arrival of the invaders. The sky burned with fire. Massive alien warships, dark and towering, blocked out the sun. The people of Earth looked up, frozen in shock. They had seen movies about alien invasions. They had imagined this moment in their worst nightmares. But now, it was real. The Zorthan Empire had arrived. They were conquerors, a species that had crushed 100 worlds before this one. Their fleets moved like a storm, swallowing planets, wiping out civilizations, leaving nothing behind but ash. To them, Earth was nothing special, just another weak planet to add to their growing empire. The Zorthans had watched humans from afar. They had studied their history, their wars, their technology. And what they saw made them laugh. Primitive, their generals said. Weak, their scientists declared. An easy victory, their emperor promised. And so, they came. The first attack. The invasion began at dawn. The Zorthans didn't send a warning. They never did. Their warships rained fire upon Earth's defenses, military bases, communication centers, power grids. In minutes, major cities fell into chaos. The world shook as explosions tore through the sky. Governments scrambled to respond. Fighter jets launched, missiles fired, but it was useless. The alien ships were too strong, their weapons too advanced. Earth's forces barely made a dent. Zorthan soldiers landed next, marching through the ruined streets. They stood taller than humans, their bodies covered in dark, metallic armor. Their weapons pulsed with blue energy, powerful enough to turn concrete into dust. Civilians ran. Some hid, some tried to fight, but their bullets bounced off the enemy's shields like pebbles against steel. Within hours, the Zorthans declared victory. Their commanders broadcasted a message across the planet. Surrender, humans. Your world belongs to the Zorthan Empire now. They expected fear. They expected humanity to kneel. But what they got was something else. The strange silence. The Zorthans spread across the planet, moving through the streets of every major city. But something felt wrong. There were no desperate cries for mercy. No begging. No leaders coming forward with white flags. The humans weren't surrendering. Instead, they watched. From windows, from rooftops, from the shadows of their destroyed cities. Their eyes burned not with fear, but with something else. Something that made even the battle-hardened Zorthan warriors uneasy. A soldier patrolling the ruins of New York turned to his commander. Why are they not afraid? The commander didn't answer, because he didn't know. Then the first attack came. The first mistake. A squad of Zorthan soldiers walked through the empty streets of Tokyo. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. Then, boom. A building collapsed on top of them. Explosions set off by human resistance fighters hiding in the rubble. In London, a group of civilians pretended to surrender, only to ambush their captors, stealing their weapons and disappearing into the underground tunnels. In the U.S., hackers broke into the Zorthan communication systems, shutting down their tracking devices, confusing their armies. All across the world, humans struck back. It wasn't an organized military response. It wasn't a war fought with armies. It was a war fought everywhere. In every alley. In every street. By every person. And the Zorthans realized something terrifying. They had miscalculated. The first fear. On the Zorthan mothership, High Commander Vector watched the battle reports. His expression darkened. This was supposed to be over by now, he muttered. Yet it wasn't. The humans weren't just resisting. They were winning small battles. His generals looked worried. They are unpredictable, one admitted. They do not fight like the others we have conquered. Vector clenched his fists. Then we burned them down. The order was given. The Zorthans intensified their attacks. More warships arrived, more soldiers deployed. But the more they'd fought, the stronger humanity became. Because unlike the other species the Zorthans had crushed, humans were different. They didn't just fight with weapons. They fought with strategy. They fought with rage. They fought like a species that had survived wars for thousands of years. And for the first time in the history of the Zorthan Empire, an invasion was not going as planned. The universe watches. Beyond Earth, alien civilizations watched the battle unfold. They had feared the Zorthans for centuries. They had seen entire planets fall in days, empires crumble without a fight. But now, they saw something they had never seen before. A species that should have been defeated was standing. A species that should have surrendered was fighting. And for the first time, across the stars, the universe did not fear the Zorthans. The universe laughed. Humanity's last stand, or a trap. The Zorthans expected an easy victory. Their warships had darkened Earth's skies, their troops had marched through the streets, and their weapons had turned cities into burning ruins. By all calculations, humanity should have surrendered. But humanity did not kneel. They adapted. They resisted. And soon, the Zorthans realized, this was not a simple war. This was a trap. The silence before the storm. Commander Vector stood aboard the Zorthan mothership, staring at the battle reports with growing unease. Every invasion before this one had followed the same pattern: land, dominate, rule. But Earth was different. Every time his soldiers advanced, the humans disappeared. Streets that had been full of civilians hours ago were suddenly empty. Entire cities had gone silent, and yet the bodies of his fallen warriors kept piling up. "Sir," an officer reported, his voice tense, "we've lost contact with 3 more battalions. No distress signals, no warnings, just gone." Vector's grip tightened around the edge of the console. This wasn't possible. Humans didn't have advanced weapons. They didn't have energy shields. They didn't even have interstellar travel. And yet, his soldiers were vanishing into the darkness, as if the planet itself was swallowing them whole. The ghosts of Earth. A Zorthan platoon patrolled the ruins of a once thriving city. Their scanners picked up nothing. No life signs, no movement, just the eerie silence of abandoned buildings and flickering streetlights. Then, the first soldier disappeared. 1 second, he was there. The next, gone. The others spun around, weapons raised. A shadow moved. They fired. Nothing. A second soldier fell, yanked into the darkness between 2 buildings. No scream, no struggle, just gone. Panic spread. These were elite warriors, trained to fight the worst the universe had to offer. And yet, against an enemy with no visible weapons, no advanced technology, and no starships, they were losing. The few survivors ran. They didn't care about orders anymore. They just wanted to get away. That's when the explosions began. Buildings collapsed around them, blocking their escape routes. Fires erupted in calculated bursts, forcing them down a single street, a perfect kill zone. And then the whispers came. Not in Zorthan, not in any language they understood, but the meaning was clear. You shouldn't have come here. The last thing the Zorthan commander saw before darkness took him was a human soldier grinning. The hunters become the hunted. High Commander Vector slammed his fist against the control panel. "This is madness," he roared. "Humans do not have this kind of technology." His officers said nothing, because the reports didn't lie. Entire battalions eliminated. Airships hacked and hijacked. Zorthan weapons now in human hands. They had expected resistance. They had not expected a war. "Sir," a trembling officer spoke, "the humans are learning. They are using our own strategies against us. They're not just fighting. They're evolving." Vector's eyes darkened. This had never happened before. Every other species had fallen within days. Even those that resisted had been crushed eventually. But the humans, they had turned the invasion into a hunt. And the Zorthans were no longer the predators. They were the prey. The first retreat. Across the planet, human forces struck back. They didn't fight head-on. They didn't march into open battles. They waited. They watched. And then, when the time was right, they attacked. Every city became a battlefield. Every ruined street hid a sniper. Every collapsed building was a trap waiting to be sprung. The Zorthans, once so confident, now moved with hesitation. Fear crept into their ranks. They flinched at every shadow. They hesitated at every doorway. And that hesitation, it was fatal. One by one, their ships fell from the skies. One by one, their armies crumbled. And for the first time in history, the Zorthan Empire issued a command they had never spoken before. Retreat. The universe watches and decides. Across the galaxy, alien empires watch the impossible unfold. For centuries, the Zorthans had been unstoppable. No species had ever resisted them. No planet had ever survived their wrath. But now, the impossible was happening. A species without warships, without colonies, without interstellar power, was winning. And as the Zorthans fled, defeated, and humiliated, the galaxy whispered a name it would never forget. Humanity. Because now, the universe did not just laugh at the Zorthans. It feared the humans. The unbreakable spirit. The Zorthans had never feared before. They had conquered planets without effort. They had crushed civilizations that had stood for millennia. They had wiped out species who dared resist them. And yet, on Earth, against a species they had mocked as weak, the mighty Zorthan Empire was falling apart. The humans were not just fighting. They were winning. The shattered illusion of victory. High Commander Vector stood in the command deck of his warship, staring at the latest battle reports. He refused to believe them. Thousands of Zorthan soldiers had been wiped out in a matter of hours. Warships had been hacked, hijacked, or destroyed. This was supposed to be an easy invasion. Instead, it had become a nightmare. "Sir," an officer said, his voice shaking, "our forces are not responding. Entire units have gone silent." Vector clenched his fists. "How? We outnumber them. We have superior weapons. We have orbital control." And yet, none of it mattered, because humans were not playing by the rules. The evolution of war. Unlike the countless species the Zorthans had conquered, humans didn't break under pressure. They adapted. They took alien weapons and modified them. They hijacked Zorthan ships and turned them into weapons of their own. They studied their enemies' tactics and countered them faster than any species had before. Every city had become a maze of death, every alley a trap, every ruined building a sniper's nest. The Zorthans fought with brute force. Humans fought with intelligence, patience, and rage. And that rage, it was unstoppable. The day the war changed, a massive Zorthan assault force had surrounded what remained of Washington, D.C. The plan was simple: wipe it out completely. The attack began at dawn. The Zorthans marched forward, their energy weapons pulsing with deadly blue light. But something was wrong. There were no defenders, no gunfire, just silence. Then, the Earth itself exploded. Entire buildings, rigged with explosives, collapsed onto the advancing army. Underground tunnels, dug by human resistance fighters, opened beneath them, swallowing squads whole. And then, the counterattack began. From the rooftops, from the rubble, from the very shadows of the city, humanity struck back. Drones, reprogrammed with stolen alien tech, swarmed the battlefield, shutting down Zorthan armor. Snipers, hidden in impossible positions, took out high-ranking officers one by one. And worst of all, the humans didn't stop. They didn't retreat. They kept coming. Zorthan soldiers, once fearless, now ran. Their formations crumbled, their confidence shattered, because for the first time in history, they were the ones being hunted. The breaking point. High Commander Vector watched the disaster unfold from his warship. This couldn't be real. This wasn't how wars were fought. The weak did not defeat the strong. The prey did not turn against the predator. And yet, it was happening. His soldiers were no longer warriors. They were victims. His warships, once the symbol of Zorthan supremacy, were falling from the sky. His empire's greatest invasion had become its worst defeat. And then the final blow came. Across the Zorthan battle network, a single, chilling message was broadcasted. A human voice, calm, certain, deadly. This is our planet, and we are not afraid of you. The fear spreads. Across the galaxy, alien empires who had once trembled before the Zorthans watched in stunned silence. They had believed humanity would be crushed. Instead, they saw the impossible. A species with no interstellar fleets. A species with no colonies. A species that had never even set foot beyond their own solar system, was defeating the greatest empire in the known universe. And suddenly, the balance of power in the galaxy shifted. The question was no longer if the Zorthans would win. The question was, would they survive? The turning point. Humanity strikes back. The Zorthans had never experienced true fear. They had burned planets. They had crushed civilizations. They had wiped out entire species with cold precision. And yet, on Earth, against a species they had dismissed as weak, the unthinkable was happening. Humanity was not just surviving. Humanity was winning. The Empire's last stand on Earth. High Commander Vector stood on the bridge of his flagship, his claws gripping the console. The holographic battle map flickered before him, displaying the front lines. Red symbols, Zorthan forces, were disappearing one by one. This cannot be happening, he muttered. But it was. Entire battalions had vanished overnight, their bases overrun by human ambushes. Zorthan warships had been hacked mid-flight, crashing into the very cities they were supposed to destroy. And now something even worse was happening. The humans were pushing back. A species without interstellar travel. A species with outdated technology. A species that should have been crushed within days, was now hunting the invaders. The counteroffensive begins. All across the world, the resistance moved in ways the Zorthans could not predict. In New York, human hackers infiltrated Zorthan war networks, scrambling their communications. Entire divisions of alien troops were left stranded, their commanders blind. In the mountains of Asia, captured Zorthan weapons have been reverse-engineered and improved, humans using enemy technology better than the invaders themselves. In South America, guerrilla forces had transformed jungles into death traps, luring Zorthan soldiers into terrain where their armor meant nothing. And in orbit, a stolen Zorthan battleship, repurposed by human engineers, fired upon its own fleet. One by one, the invaders fell. And one by one, the humans rose. The Empire's desperation. Vector had never known defeat. He had crushed a dozen worlds. He had silenced rebellion before it could begin. He had never lost a war. Until now. "Sir," an officer reported, barely able to contain his panic. "Our ground forces are in full retreat. Cities we once controlled are being overrun. Resistance forces have taken control of 3 warships." Vector's blood ran cold. The thought was impossible. No species had ever turned a Zorthan invasion into a war. And yet here was the reality. The weaklings had become the hunters. And his soldiers. They were breaking. The fall of the Zorthan line. The humans struck everywhere at once. Washington, D.C. was retaken in a brutal night assault. Human soldiers emerging from the underground, firing stolen Zorthan weapons with terrifying precision. London, thought to be lost, erupted in chaos as civilian fighters stormed alien bunkers, planting explosives that turned the invaders' own bases into craters. Tokyo, once surrounded, saw its captors slaughtered in an ambush so perfectly timed that Zorthan commanders believed it had to be an inside job. It wasn't. The humans had simply learned. Faster than any species before them. Better than any army the Zorthans had faced. And now, the Empire was crumbling. The first Zorthan defection. The moment came sooner than anyone expected. A Zorthan warlord, one of Vector's most trusted generals, sent out a message not to his own kind, but to humanity. We cannot win this war. Your people are not like the others. You do not break. You do not surrender. You evolve. The Zorthan Empire is doomed. But I wish to live. I am willing to trade secrets. In exchange, I ask for mercy. And just like that, the first cracks in the Empire appeared. The universe reacts. Across the galaxy, alien species watched in silence. The Zorthans had ruled for centuries. They had burned entire civilizations to dust. They had declared themselves unstoppable. But now, they were losing. To a species that had no colonies, to a species that had never fought in space, to a species that should have been an easy conquest. And in the shadows of the galaxy, whispers began to spread. If the humans can defeat the Zorthans, who else might rise? The final order. Vector stood before the War Council, his voice shaking with rage. We cannot let this stand. He roared. We will burn this planet to its core if we must. Humanity must not survive. But for the first time, his generals hesitated. They were no longer so sure. Because if the humans had done this much damage with nothing, what would happen if they survived? If they advanced? If they became more than just a single planet? Fear crept into the hearts of the Zorthans. And when Vector gave his final order, destroy them all, even his own commanders wondered, what if it was already too late? The universe watches in awe. The impossible had happened. The Zorthan Empire, conquerors of 100 worlds, destroyers of civilizations, rulers of the void, were losing. Not to a mighty fleet, not to a superior force, but to humanity. A species that had never left its own solar system. A species that had no colonies, no interstellar warships, no grand armies. And yet, here they stood, not just surviving, winning. The breaking point. High Commander Vector could no longer deny the truth. The invasion was not just a failure. It was a disaster. Entire fleets had been hijacked or destroyed. Zorthan soldiers, once feared across the galaxy, now ran at the sight of human fighters. The humans had turned war into an art. They struck in silence, disappeared like ghosts, and adapted faster than anything the Zorthans had ever faced. And now, they were coming for the Empire itself. A message to the galaxy. The turning point came not from a battle, but from a message. For the first time in history, humanity reached beyond its own world, not with a plea for help, but with a declaration. A broadcast was sent across the stars, intercepted by every empire, every faction, every race watching in silent disbelief. A human stood in front of the camera, battered but unbroken, eyes burning with something no alien had ever seen before. Defiance. To those who thought we would kneel, to those who thought we would break, you were wrong. We are humanity. We do not fall. We rise. And if you come for us again, know this. We will not be waiting. We will be coming for you. The message spread faster than any warship. It echoed in the halls of power across the galaxy. And for the first time, the universe feared Earth. The Empire begins to crumble. Across Zorthan-occupied worlds, the news spread. The invincible Empire was not invincible. Rebellions erupted overnight. Species that had been enslaved for generations rose up, emboldened by the sight of humans standing against the impossible. And when they fought back, they did not fight like before. They fought like humans. Guerrilla warfare, sabotage, precision strikes, traps laid so perfectly that entire Zorthan forces disappeared overnight. The Zorthans, once the galaxy's dominant power, were now on the defensive. The desertion begins. Vector watched in horror as the Empire began to collapse from the inside. His officers whispered in fear. His soldiers hesitated before carrying out orders. His warlords, once loyal, began to defect. Some fled. Some switched sides. Some simply refused to fight a war they no longer believed in. And then the final blow came. A high-ranking Zorthan general, one of Vector's own commanders, sent a transmission to Earth. I am no longer your enemy. I wish to surrender. Not just for myself. For my entire fleet. Thousands of Zorthan warships, entire armadas, switched sides. They had seen what humans could do. They had felt fear. And they had made a choice. They would rather stand with the victors than die with a dying empire. The moment the galaxy knew. Across the stars, civilizations that had once feared the Zorthans watched in stunned silence. For centuries, they had lived in the shadow of the empire, knowing resistance meant annihilation. Now, they saw something else. Hope. Because if humanity, a species that had never even left its own world, could do this, what could the rest of the galaxy achieve? The Zorthans had believed they were untouchable. But now, for the first time in history, they were the hunted. The final order. On the Zorthan homeworld, the Emperor sat in his throne room, staring at the reports flooding in. The humans had been an afterthought, a minor conquest, a species to be added to the long list of those who had fallen before the Empire. And yet here he was, not ruling over Earth, but watching his own empire burn. With slow, measured rage, he gave the last order of the war. Prepare the Doomsday Fleet. If we cannot rule them, we will destroy them. The war is not over. Humanity had won the first war. But the Zorthans were not finished. They had been humiliated. They had been broken. But they were not extinct. And now, they were desperate. Desperate enemies are the most dangerous of all. And as the final battle loomed, one thing was clear. This war was far from over. It was only just beginning. The fall of the invincible empire, the Zorthan Empire, had ruled the galaxy for centuries. They had never lost a war. They had never known fear. And yet, as the last of their fleets burned in the void, as their warlords turned traitor, as their armies crumbled beneath human resistance, they understood a terrible truth. The era of Zorthan rule was over. The Doomsday Fleet, the final fleet of the Empire, the Doomsday Armada, was unlike anything humanity had faced before. Thousands of warships, each capable of reducing a planet to rubble. Weapons powerful enough to crack open worlds. A fleet built not to conquer, but to destroy. High Commander Vector stood on the bridge of his flagship, his eyes filled with cold determination. This war has humiliated us, he growled, but we will have our revenge. His second-in-command hesitated. Sir, the fleet is all we have left. If we fail, the Empire is finished. Vector's voice was ice. Then we do not fail. The Doomsday Fleet turned toward Earth. It would be the last battle. Either the Zorthans would reclaim their dominance, or humanity would end them forever. The battle for Earth. The humans saw them coming. The sky lit up with thousands of burning engines as the largest armada in history descended upon their world. It was a force too large to stop, too powerful to resist. And yet, as the Zorthans prepared for their final assault, they saw something strange. The humans were waiting. They were not afraid. They were ready. Because this was the moment they had been fighting for. The moment they would decide, once and for all, if humanity would remain trapped on Earth, or if they would claim the stars themselves. The trap is set. As the first wave of Zorthan ships entered Earth's atmosphere, the sky itself rebelled. Satellites that had once served as mere communication tools now functioned as deadly weapons, sending out hacking signals that shut down enemy shields. Reprogrammed alien warships, stolen and modified by human engineers, turned against their former masters, opening fire from within their own formation. And then, as the battle reached its peak, Earth's counterattack began. The resistance launched missiles, not toward the enemy ships, but into space itself. For years, they had studied the Zorthan battle tactics. They knew where they would move, how they would position their fleet. And now, in that very spot, a hidden minefield of repurposed Zorthan explosives, carefully placed before the battle had even begun, detonated in a chain reaction that obliterated a third of the enemy fleet instantly. The Zorthans had walked into a perfect ambush. The fall of Vector. On the bridge of his flagship, Vector watched his fleet disintegrate. His warships, once unstoppable, were being ripped apart by their own stolen technology. His soldiers, once fearless, were surrendering en masse, their will to fight shattered. And humanity. They were relentless. They did not let up. They did not hesitate, because they understood something the Zorthans never had. This was not just a battle. This was revenge. A final explosion rocked Vector's ship as human soldiers stormed the bridge. He turned, ready to fight, ready to die. But the humans did not kill him. They stood over him, weapons raised, their faces filled not with anger, but with certainty. "You lost," one of them said. And in that moment, Vector finally understood. The Zorthan Empire was finished. The aftermath. Word spread across the stars. The Zorthan Empire, once feared, once invincible, was no more. Their fleets had been destroyed. Their armies had surrendered. Their worlds, once ruled with an iron fist, had risen in rebellion. And humanity, the species that had once been seen as nothing, had taken down the greatest empire in the galaxy. They were no longer a single-world species. They were no longer overlooked. They were legends. And as the galaxy whispered their name, one truth became clear. Humanity would never be underestimated again. Humanity's legacy, the birth of legends. The war was over. The Zorthan Empire, once the most feared power in the galaxy, was no more. Their fleets had been destroyed. Their soldiers had surrendered. Their leaders had fallen. And the species they had mocked, the species they had believed too weak to resist, stood victorious. Humanity had done the impossible. And now, the universe would never forget their name. The day the galaxy changed, the fall of the Zorthans sent shockwaves across the cosmos. Alien empires that had once bowed to Zorthan rule now stood free. Civilizations that had lived in fear for centuries rose in rebellion. The galaxy was changing. The old order was collapsing. And at the heart of it all, humanity. The species that had never left their own solar system before this war was now the most feared and respected force in the stars. They had no empire. They had no colonies. And yet, the universe whispered their name with awe. Because if humans could defeat the strongest empire in the galaxy without war fleets or planetary bases, what would they become when they truly reached the stars? The last words of a broken emperor. On the ruins of the Zorthan homeworld, the once mighty emperor sat alone in his shattered throne room. The voices of his advisors were gone. His soldiers had abandoned him. The banners of his empire lay in the dust. And across the stars, humanity's victory was being celebrated. A broken communicator crackled to life beside him. A message from Earth. A single sentence, spoken in the calm, steady voice of a human general. "You should have left us alone." The emperor closed his eyes, and for the first time in his life, he laughed. Not because it was funny, but because he finally understood. The Zorthans had always believed that war was about technology, about power, about who had the biggest fleet. But that wasn't why they lost. They lost because humans were something else, something the galaxy had never seen before. And now, the universe would never be the same. The first step beyond Earth. On Earth, the celebrations did not last long. Humanity had won, but they were no longer just a planet of survivors. They were something more. For the first time in history, they looked up at the stars not with fear, but with purpose. Because now, they understood the truth. The galaxy was not safe. There would always be another empire, another conqueror, another enemy, and humanity. They would never wait for the fight to come to them again. They would go to the fight, not as victims, not as the conquered, but as the ones who strike first, And as the first human-built starships prepared for launch, carrying the victors of the greatest war the galaxy had ever seen into the unknown, one thing was certain: humanity was coming, and the stars would never forget. The birth of legends. Stories spread across planets, across moons, across civilizations. Tales of the war. Tales of how the invincible empire had been crushed by a species that had never even left its homeworld before. Some told it as a warning. Some told it as an inspiration. But all told it the same way, with fear, because if this was what humans could do at the beginning of their journey into the stars, what would they become when they truly mastered them? No one knew the answer. But one thing was certain: the age of humanity had begun, and the universe would never be the same again. The end, or the beginning, humanity had won. But this was not the end of their story. This was just the first chapter. Because now, for the first time, the stars belonged to them, and whatever lay beyond, they were ready.